Why start with her story? Simple. Because my desire to liberate myself as a man, to even begin on that journey, firstly began with the desire to liberate the woman from her own captivity. It's hard to describe what that world is like. It's hard to relate it to people. For a lot of my healing journey, I've used metaphor to describe what it feels like. And for me, it's just been like this sprawling metropolis, this endless city with steel regret and cold brick and mortar of pain that I just could not get out of. It was a place that I locked myself in. And, for her, it could be a house. It could be a prison cell. It could be a brothel. It could be a shoreline. But for me, it was an empire. And the most important part of the story doesn't come from understanding what my empire was like, but understanding why I finally chose to leave it. I knew for many years that it wasn't working for me before I actually chose to leave. You see, it was safe. I had built these walls, I had built these ideas around people, around my interactions and relationships. Stereotypes, prejudices. I would decide if you could get close to me. I would decide if you were trustworthy. A lot of times when I couldn't find facts, I'd fill it with my own reasoning. And this never showed up more than it did with my relationships with women. Not having my birth mother present and not having that stability the first few years of my life really rocked me. And even though I was adopted by one of the most loving women I've ever met, she struggled often with illness. She struggled often with being in the hospital. She had multiple blood disorders and health disorders that always threatened to take her away from me, to end her life. And so a lot of my childhood, I grew up believing that women were absent. They were going to leave one way or another, either by their own choice, as it seemed to me that my birth mother did, or by the choice of fate, the choice of life. They'd die. Fate would decide for them. And this narrative built in my mind. And for my middle school years, my high school years, many of my early dating into my mid-dating relationships in my mid-20s, this narrative played out. And it became this fuel for this fire that said, well, see, everything I believed keeps happening. Everything I believed keeps reoccurring. And it was really challenging for me to finally arrive at a place of understanding that I was the one bringing the reality to life. And it's hard to articulate, but the best way I've found to explain it is through a victim mentality and the resolvement of that, the overcoming of that. Because you see, for me, every relationship I had, every woman I interacted with, I was already a victim. I was already waiting to be victimized. I was already waiting to be betrayed. And I projected the past relationships I had onto my present. And sure enough, self-fulfilling prophecy, things played out. And it wasn't until 2015 that I had an experience that allowed me to finally say to myself words that I have been trying to say since I was a young child. And that's that I was wrong. I hurt someone very badly once by accusing them and coming at them very harshly and unlovingly, and that person left feeling ashamed. That person left feeling like it was their fault. I distinctly remember saying that night to them, I am never wrong. And imagine the weight of realizing, that one day you are, and looking back at your life through a scope and saying, wow, I've been wrong about a lot of things. All the things that I told myself, all the reasoning I fed myself for why people left or what went wrong completely negated their own life journeys or their own emotions and factored it completely back to me as a victim. And so I had built this monstrous idea, this empire of defense that literally pretty much down to a science had the stages of relationship down, and every single one of them ended with people getting pushed away, shut out, and completely cut off if they couldn't meet a threshold of behavior. My defense systems would kick in. I was triggered. And all the rage and all the anger would build up, and it would end in a shouting match, or abandoning the person and not talking anymore, or trying to hold on and stifle it all down until it finally did come out. And I was so angry. I was so upset. I tried to tell myself that I was over emotional, that guys aren't supposed to feel like this, we're not supposed to care. And, patriarchy really kicked in and took its toll. Like, I felt even worse because I was so emotional and so hurting. And all the while, I'm surrounded with media messages that say, hey, you know what? Guys don't feel. Girls are just there for sex. This is what it's about. And I'm sitting back like, what the hell is wrong with me? Why do I actually want a relationship, and why can't I seem to maintain one? And so following the experience finally in 2015, I was able to step back from a really devastating situation for both me and the friend that I lost and realize we were both hurting. Hurting people hurt other people, and why it took so many years for that one little microchip of knowledge to implant itself in my brain and finally in my heart is beyond me. But I know at that point in time, it started to flourish into a greater idea. And thus far, I have spent the last several years looking at men and women not as victimizers of each other, but victims of ideologies of each other. They both believe things about the opposite gender. And that work has challenged me. It's really hard to look at someone when they hurt you, when they shatter your heart and say, you weren't out to get me. You're not an evil person, but it's vital for recovery. And I think history speaks to that. It's funny because I've always really, really admired the work of Martin Luther King Jr., especially as an advocacy leader, as a freedom empowerment leader. But more and more, as I researched his work, I was able to understand the real personal value of the story. And see, the reason that Martin Luther King was truly successful is not because it was black versus white or this side versus that side. It's because Martin Luther King was fighting a war, but he was fighting it with a love that was inclusive for everyone. What they did not need was more resistance, more revolution, more violence, more outrage. What people really needed was unity. And I think that I see that so often now with women versus men, feminist versus patriarchy, is that we're so justified, we're so angry. I think we've now come to a place where we justify violence, we justify dishonesty, we justify false accusations, we justify superiority and prejudices and racism and all sorts of things in the name of making sure that we're safe. This date, the 28th of August, marks the delivery of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech in 1963, and being one of the most monumental periods and monumental deliveries in history, I wanted to pay homage to that idea because I truly believe that the mentalities and the ideologies communicated in that speech and through his work extend into us today. And I think that if we as men and women can ultimately wrap our mind around the idea that we need to heal collectively, it will change the scope of our world. My goal is to start working through this movement, through my advocacy, through these blogs, to create a safe space for men to speak up. Men out there that felt like I did, that were angry, that were hurting, that were very bitter or hateful of women. I understand it, I get it. But create safe spaces in a culture for men so they can finally speak up and say, hey, I'm gonna be honest, this is how I feel. I don't wanna feel like this anymore. I don't wanna feel like I have to fit the patriarchal model. I don't wanna feel like I've got to respond with this violence or this negativity. I want some other way, a healthy way, to deal with where I'm at. I want men to know it's okay. And I want women to know that, it's going to be more than words. So often we say we're sorry, we'll never do it again, and that amounts to the same thing happening next week. And so if I could offer anything to the women that I've hurt, that I've given empty apologies to, it's this: action. Action of building a world where I not only better myself, but work with other men to help them better themselves. I think it will change how we raise our children. It will change how we portray things in media. It will change so many things if we can cut out the divide and understand that unity, though challenging, is simply the only way we're going to get through the division that has taken us over at this point. It's much larger than human trafficking. Certainly a vulgar expression of what's happened, but the mentalities that fuel human trafficking start at very low levels. Media messaging, mentalities. And so if we can start with ourselves, there is no desire to be subtle. This is the hour that we fire into the night, the hour that we take back what fear has claimed from us, and let us do it boldly. Let us declare an anarchy of love that says we're not going to stay and play by the rules of our victim mentalities and our defense systems anymore. Let us say that we're not going to fall and be hindered and chained by the social opinions of patriarchy or bitterly defined feminism. And though challenging, let us declare it as it was declared all those years ago. Let it be a dream that lives on. Let it be something that lives on far past the time that we're here. Let us take that stand and let them hear us. And let us call it the 28th of Redemption.
We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.